Hey everyone, Scott here, and today I wanted to talk a bit about the Xeno Dragons deck. Sorry for the kind of awkward presentation kind of style in this video, it's just the main website I would use. DBS Deck Planet seems to be having some issues with their card images at the moment, so we'll just have to settle with Windows Photo Viewer for this video. So yeah, in this video I wanted to give my thoughts on the Xeno Dragons deck. It's the only deck I've been playing for the last few weeks. I just wanted to give my thoughts on kind of the position it's in at the moment. So the deck itself, in terms of like power level, it doesn't seem particularly strong. Not to say it doesn't have good matchups. I mean, it does, especially, funnily enough, against other mill decks. It works out really well. I've been on both sides of the kind of playing a mill deck versus the Xeno Dragons deck kind of experience. My first time playing against the Xeno Dragons deck, I was using a Janemba mill deck. It was just impossible for me to be able to actually mill them out because of this card here, the Unison Toa Resonance of Shadow. That +1, where they're just able to put 3 Shadow Dragon extra cards from their drop area back on the bottom of their deck, just prevented me from being able to mill them out. I was really just only able to mill them out consistently with the leader, with putting 2 cards from their deck in the drop. If they can put 3 back, I'm just never going to be able to actually effectively mill them out, and the whole time they're milling me out. And yeah, it just was not a good experience. And then I've also played with the Xeno Dragons deck a few times against Cooler Mill, the leader from set 9. And in that case, I think you are favoured as the Xeno Dragons deck, because just comes down to the fact that you don't actually have to play any of the battle cards in order to mill them out. You only really mill them out with your extra cards, whereas the cooler deck needs you to play battle cards out for them to have something to minus so that they can start milling you. You just leave it with your leader and the Unison out and just pass without playing any battle cards. There's not a lot they can do. At that point they have to start trying to get aggressive and just getting their 5-cost double strike coolers out as soon as they can and just start to try and just aggro you down, because again, even if they can start milling you, you're just able to put some of those cards back every time. So while you're not doing a lot of milling, you're not going to be milling them like 5-10 cards in a turn. Just those 1 or 2 cards each turn just do add up over time. So like I say, the only Shadow Dragon battle card you really think about playing against cooler decks is if they do try and aggro you down, then you try and find your Oceanus negates, and that can pretty much shut down their entire turn. If they're able to get 2 or 3 coolers out, you can just play this and negate the first attack, and then they're just not going to want to keep going. And then even if they do manage to minus this, they're only ever really going to be able to do that once, because it has so little health. So at most they're going to mill you like 1-2 cards. In the cooler matchup, the cooler player has to be aggressive, but at the same time they can't be too aggressive, because then you have access to Ultimate Dragon Quake, which specifically targets a battle card bigger than their energy. So if they're playing out those 5-drop double strike coolers turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, you're able to activate this during the battle and send it to the warp, and then you mill one card from the top of their deck. I mean, they get it back at the end of the turn if you play this early, but it stops you from taking a double strike hit, so it's worth it overall. Delayed them for a turn at least in most cases. So yeah, I think you are favoured in the matchup against most mill decks. There is one mill deck that I don't know that you're necessarily favoured against, but it is kind of janky. It's the Android 18 kind of combo mill deck, where they use Android 21 Scheme to give you all the clone tokens, and then they get out the 5-drop freeze, I think it's called 100% Overdrive. They swing at you with it and then minus all your stuff by 30k, and then they put like the rest of your deck goes to the drop area in one go. In that case, the kind of overtime kind of card advantage you get off the Toa isn't going to come into effect if they're putting literally the entire rest of your deck in the drop in one go. The fact you can put 3 extra cards back a turn isn't going to help you in that case. But I think that is kind of a janky deck. So in those cases, I think you as the Shadow Dragon player just start getting aggressive and start just trying to attack them down with a lot of the attacking threats you can kind of get out. And you just have to kill them before they can get that freezer down and attack with it. Now, the one caveat for this video is everything I'm going to say has subject to change when we get the rest of the Black Shadow Dragons. Currently we're missing 3. There's no Ice, Nova or Rage Xeno versions of those cards. So even a card, again, going back to the Toe Unison, it's -7 lets you choose 7 Black Shadow Dragons with different character names and play them from your hand or drop. So currently there's only 4. There's the Sin, Oceanus, Haze and Natron. We are still owed, I guess you would say, 3 more Black Shadow Dragons. I'm assuming those are going to be revealed in the next set 15, Xeno Showdown, I believe it's called. They've started to reveal cards from that set, so once we get to the black cards. So yeah, if we do get the rest of the Shadow Dragons in this upcoming set, the deck should theoretically only get stronger from here. I'd be hard-pressed to see how the deck could get worse with more options, but I don't know, maybe the new cards won't really impact the deck very much, and everything else around it will get stronger, and the deck will be worse off overall because of that. But I don't really anticipate that's going to be the case. It kind of does feel a bit when you're playing the deck as like an incomplete deck. Like it feels there as a few things missing, and maybe I'll go into that a bit later when I start to talk about some of the specific kind of drawbacks of the deck. But there are things that the deck is kind of missing, like a good counterplay would be nice. I mean, it could probably do with another negate. I know there is the Oceanus, which is a really great negate if you can actually get it to stick, but I feel like we probably want a extra card negate of some kind in the deck that would really go a long way to helping. From my experiences with playing with the deck, it does feel kind of weak on the defensive side, which is not really something you want from a mill deck. In a lot of cases, a mill deck, you want to just set up a brick wall and slowly chip away at your opponent's deck until you win. Doesn't necessarily feel like you can do that at the moment. Like, it does have some defensive abilities, like obviously this Oceanus Shenron here is pretty good, but the 2 main drawbacks are it has to actually hit the board for you to get the kind of floodgate ability for you to totally shut off your opponent's turn. Like, if they have any kind of counterplay for it now, which a lot more decks are doing now, they're having ways of stopping 2 or less battle cards from coming into play. Hit a lot of the floodgates, not just this, but Topo, Poutine, just all the really good floodgates that hit the board as a 2 cost. In the case of this Oceanus Shenron, if you're paying 2, discarding a card from your hand, and your opponent just counterplays it for free or maybe even just 1 energy, you are kind of screwed in that case. They're just going to keep going at you with everything they have, and they're not even going to be milling the cards, so that is a real big downside of this card. So I've had to add this in afterwards because I forgot to say what the second issue with Oceanus is. Basically, it comes down to the fact that getting 4 cards from the top of your opponent's deck is just not on the same level as removing 2 cards from their hand, like a Topo or a Poutine would do. Basically, it comes down to this, like if you Oceanus and your opponent has, say, more than 12 cards left in their deck, and they've got a bunch of battle cards out, they can just keep going into you. And if you are able to survive that, it's not because of the Oceanus. If you get my understanding, like when you Topo, your opponent, if they want to keep attacking, obviously they get rid of the 2 cards. That's 2 less cards potentially, depending on what they had in their hand. That's 5, maybe 10k less combo power that they could potentially be getting rid of to attack. Whereas with the Oceanus, because it's the top 4 cards of their deck go into the drop, that doesn't affect their hand, that doesn't affect the amount of combo power they have, that doesn't affect their ability to attack into you effectively. Like, if you are able to survive the turn, they keep swinging in even after you've Oceanus. You would have been able to survive that even without playing the Oceanus. Like, if you're just able to combo out of all their attacks, you would have been able to do that anyway. And the Oceanus, all that's done is push them closer to being milled out, which sometimes you can get them with. But that more relies on your opponent's mistiming when they go all in. So like I say, if they had, 12 cards left in their deck, you can't really mill 12 cards in a single turn with this deck. So they would have had an extra turn they could have survived and gone in a turn later where maybe they had even drawn some more cards or this or that. If your opponent goes all in under the effect of Oceanus and they don't get you, that is because they poorly planned when they were going to go all in on you, not because Oceanus is a really great card that like can stop them from kind of winning the game outright. Like I say, it's only once they get to, say, less than 12 cards in their deck, so where they could only realistically attack twice this turn, that is the point at which Oceanus becomes the brick wall. Especially with the fact she has blocker is actually good, because you use this, she hits the board, you're saying to them, right, your next attack, where you get rid of 4 cards from the top of your deck, that's not going into my leader, that's going into this Oceanus. Unless, of course, they have a way of getting rid of it before they attack into you. Some way of KOing it or sending it to the warp. But generally speaking, Oceanus only becomes like a brick wall that your opponent can't get around in the very, very late game, to where the point where you were probably going to be able to maybe get them next turn, maybe the turn after. That is the point at which she really stops your opponent. But before that, if it's turn 2, turn 3, you're against a really aggressive deck, they've got so many cards still left in their deck that it doesn't matter. The putting 4 in every time, they either can get you or they can't get you, and a lot of the time they can't get you, but you still aren't close to milling them out. So that is, I think, the other downside of Oceanus kind of as a floodgate. And there's also the other Oceanus, the extra card, Ultimate Whirlwind Spin. This is one that gives you a little bit of defense in the sense that it lets you discard a black Shadow Dragon to give your leader plus 1k for the turn. The games where this card is good, it's really good. Like, you just make your leader into 16k during your opponent's turn, and then just every time they're swinging in, they've got a combo or something from their hand, because to go from 15 to say 20, and then you're just able to use a single card from your hand again to get out of it. Or if they drop 2 cards or a super combo, then you just use your own super combo in response and you're out of that attack. You can pretty much match your opponent 1 for 1 in most cases in terms of combo power, assuming they're only swinging in with cards that are 15k, which plenty of decks do, but anything bigger than that and suddenly it is still helpful. They're swinging in with something with 25, you only need to get to 26. Like I say, single super combo will do that for you, but once you start to get into the higher and higher power levels, like 40k, you know, the 1k at that point isn't a massive help. You're either going to be able to get above 40 or you're not. Then obviously there's the cards I was talking about, like Ultimate Dragon Quake, or even the activate main / battle on Ultimate Dark Dragon Slain Bullet here. These are both activate battles you can use during your opponent's turn to get rid of one of the cards they're attacking you with. In the case of both these cards, they have pretty big downsides. Ultimate Dragon Quake, like I was talking about before, has to be a battle card bigger than their energy. Now, you think that wouldn't be a big issue with the way that a lot of decks are able to cheat on kind of energy costs at the moment, but you would be surprised how often this is a dead card in your hand. Like, you get to turn 3, turn 4, maybe even turn 5, because you're not getting super aggressive with them, you're trying to mill them out over time. So your game can quite often go to a turn 5, turn 6 even sometimes. And that starts to become the point where they're not going to have many things bigger than their energy at that point. Like I was just saying with Cooler deck, like I think the biggest card they generally won is the 5 cost Cooler, so at that point this card just becomes dead. And that goes for a lot of other matchups as well. And then the big downside on Ultimate Dark Dragon Slain Bullet is your opponent gets to choose the battle card that goes. So if they have like a dinky little 1-drop that doesn't have barrier, and they're swinging in with, you know, Xeno Cell or something, they'll just get rid of the 1-drop and just kill you with Xeno Cell, so you can only really use this in response to your opponent attacking with one big thing when they have nothing else on board. Does happen from time to time, but it's not reliable. There is also potentially Tackle. I'm just going to drop the Ultimate Dragon part of all these cards, I'm not going to say it every time. But Tackle can also let you warp one of your opponent's battle cards with no restrictions. The big downside in that case, well, there's 2 really, that kind of compound with one another. First is your opponent has to have a unison in play, but a lot of people are smart, and if they know that you need them to have a unison in play, they just won't play a unison if their deck isn't like entirely built around the Unison, which a lot of decks aren't at this point. The Unison is just kind of a bonus rather than the center point of the deck, even with the new Spirit Boost cards. But yeah, so your opponent can play around it by just not playing a Unison. But then also your opponent has the choice. They can remove 2 markers from their Unison, and in which case you don't get to warp one of their battle cards, the battle card they're attacking with. And so, again, this can become kind of a dead card in your hand. It doesn't do what you want it to do, which is obviously defend you from your opponent kind of attacking in. So yeah, again, to kind of summarize that, I don't think the deck is particularly strong defensively. A lot of these cards that we were just talking about kind of have drawbacks or situations where they're not going to be able to be useful. So in terms of like reliable defense that you have, it's Spin, Whirlwind Spin, and the Oceanus itself, the Negative Energy Explosion. Outside of that, you have to start going to cards outside the archetype, but because of the way a lot of the autos on these cards, the battle cards at least work, where you look at the top card of your deck, and if it's a Black Shadow Dragon, you add it to your hand. That discourages you, like actively discourages you from using cards outside of the archetype, because the more cards obviously you have in your deck that aren't Black Shadow Dragons, the more chances you're not going to hit on one of these autos. And so if you're looking for defensive options outside of the archetype, you are risking you're going to turn the top card of your deck, it's not going to be a Shadow Dragon, and suddenly a lot of the decent effects that you have aren't going to be as good. I think a lot of the effects in this deck are built around the idea that when you either play or discard a Shadow Dragon and you look at the top card of your deck, most of the time it's going to be a Black Shadow Dragon, so it goes to your hand. I think if you build your deck in a way that that is no longer the case, that it's not like 90% of the time you're going to hit a Black Shadow Dragon, suddenly a lot of the effects become actively bad, I think. Especially if you're discarding a dragon to look at the top card of the deck. If you don't hit on that, you're literally just losing a card from your hand. You're going negative on the card advantage side. And if it gets to the point where that is happening 2-3 times a game, you're pretty much dead, I think, at that point. Any kind of aggressive pressure your opponent can put on you, you're just not going to have enough cards in hand to kind of resist. And you're just going to get steamrolled. Like, if we go back and look at the front side of the leader, when it attacks, you have to discard a Black Shadow Dragon card from your hand, and then you draw a card. Now, obviously, because this is a Shadow Dragon, most of the battle card Shadow Dragons you discard, they have the effect of look at the top card of the deck, add it to your hand if it's a Black Shadow Dragon. If you miss on this skill, then this immediately becomes worse than 90% of the leaders out there at the moment, because most leaders at the moment, to be like playable, have some kind of guaranteed card draw on the front side. And with this, while you do draw the card, you're also discarding a card for it, and if that card you're discarding does not also get you a card, you're just staying exactly where you were in terms of number of cards in your hand. And so that is one of the big downsides of the deck. There are very few ways to kind of gain an advantage within the archetype in terms of like hand size. Most of the time you're just either discarding or playing a card, and that lets you look at the top card, add it to your hands. So you kind of stay neutral in terms of your hand size. It's not going up, it's not going down. But this isn't really a deck like some of the other ones out there where your opponent could say to you, you know, turn 2, turn 3, how many cards you got in hand? And you go be like 16, 17, you know. I remember where back before Mech Freezer was banned, there was a couple of times my opponent asked me, like I say, turn 3, maybe turn 4 at the latest, hey, how many cards you got in your hand? It's like 21, 22, something crazy like that. This isn't that type of deck. Especially if your opponent starts to pressure you kind of aggressively in the early turns, where you have to start comboing away your battle cards from your hand. Suddenly your hand's going to get very small, and you're just relying on taking life, taking hits to actually fuel your hand, which isn't a great long-term strategy, obviously. So that, in my opinion, is one of the biggest downsides of this deck. Is while it looks like you're doing a lot of card drawing because you keep revealing the top card of your deck over and over again and it to your hand, you're not actually increasing the number of options in your hand in a lot of cases. In terms of like pure card advantage, where you end up with more cards in your hand than when you started, is with the leader on the backside is just a straight up draw 1. There's no discard involved with it. And the only other skill in the deck that can give you a plus in terms of cards in hand, there is the super combo, but again, you're actually using that, so it's just replacing itself. The only true other like increase in hand size you get is with this card here, Whirlwind Spin. Since it lets you look at the top 5, add a black Shadow Dragon battle card to your hand. Then you can discard a Shadow Dragon battle card from your hand to give your leader the +1k I was talking about before. And then presumably that black Shadow Dragon card you're discarding also lets you look at the top card and add it to your hand. So in terms of the way this works, you look at the top 5, you add 1, so you're +1. You discard 1, so you go back to 0. But discarding that lets you look at the top card. It should come to your hand. So you will end up with 1 more card in your hand than when you started. But again, this is another one of those skills where if you turn over that top card of your deck and it's not a black Shadow Dragon, it has to go to the bottom. You're just going 1 for 1. But when you compare it to what a lot of other decks are able to do, it just doesn't seem good enough to make this like a really strong deck. In terms of what I think the deck actually needs going forward, like I said before, a nice kind of Shadow Dragon extra card negate would be good, just as another play you would have defensively while also milling your opponent out. Right now, the way I'm running the deck, I'm kind of relying on a couple of power bursts to give me that little bit of extra kind of negate power. But obviously that introduces the fact that if I hit one of those off the top of my deck, I'm not drawing it, it's going straight to the bottom. So if we could get an extra card with the Shadow Dragon permanent, like a lot of them have, that would be really good for that. I think also a counterplay would be good for the deck. Again, your choices really come down to, well, I mean, black isn't a great kind of colour already in terms of counterplays. You're only really looking at either the Dewdrop or Super Kamehameha, which neither of those are fantastic for the deck, obviously because neither of them are Shadow Dragons. But also the Dewdrop's like 2 for a counterplay, which maybe is a bit much. And the Super Kamehameha, you can actually crit the life rather than pay its cost. But still, I think that only hits small cards. I think it has to be, it's either 2 or less or 3 or less. So it's only really good against your opponent's floodgates, which you don't really care as much about with this deck. At least the way I've been playing it, and maybe I've been playing it totally wrong. I'm not really sending too many attacks into my opponent in a single turn. Like, I'll swing with my leader and maybe a battle card, maybe 2. And the Unison sometimes if they have a decent target for it. I mean, the Unison itself is only 10k, I believe. We'll see now, yeah. It's only 10k, so a lot of the time it's only if they're playing a Unison that's 10k or less that I even bother swinging with this. Especially once their leader's awaken. Most of the time I'm not going to swing in with this and combo on top of it. I'll just leave it in active mode. So I was talking with someone the other day about a counterplay that I think they could make for the deck that I think would fit in with the way they kind of have built these cards to kind of work. But it would be some kind of counterplay where you give your opponent the choice. They can either choose to put the card they're playing in, say, the drop rather than playing it. And if they don't, then you place a number of cards equal to that card's energy cost in their drop area. So say they were playing like a 5-drop, you counterplay it, you say to them, do you want to put it in the drop instead of playing it? They say no, and then you go, okay, that costs 5, so put the top 5 cards of your deck in your drop instead. Like, there'd be some cards that would be amazing against, like Xeno, for instance. If you could just counterplay that and say, right, either that's going to your drop or you're going to mill 12, that would be pretty crazy. But I don't think that would be kind of too broken. Like, at the end of the day, you kind of give your opponent the choice, although I think with the way deflect works, so like Xeno has deflect, I don't think they actually would be able to choose it in that case to put it in the drop, because it obviously deflect stops it being affected by counterplays. So I think in that case you would have to mill the number of cards equal to its energy cost. But I like that as a kind of idea because it really does give your opponent the choice in a lot of cases. They can really just think to themselves, right, how important is this card I'm trying to play? Can I afford to even just mill, 5, 6, 7, 8 cards from the top of my deck? In a lot of cases, they probably would do that if the card they're playing is like really gonna win them the game this turn and they're not in a kind of risk of milling out this turn, a lot of cases they will just say, yeah, I'll let the card resolve, I'll let it hit the board, and I'm going to swing at you with it, and we'll see if you survive. So yeah, like I said, I think that idea fits with a lot of the cards they've already made for the archetype. So for instance, like if we go back to the bullet card, the counterplay on this, let your opponent choose. So the big downside of this card obviously is it only hits unisons. I have actually found it quite hard to use the counterplay of this card kind of effectively. Obviously that's always going to be the case when you're giving your opponent a choice. But I also find a lot of the time my opponent just gets the unison down turn 1. Like if I'm going first, I can charge a black obviously, pass turn with the 1 energy open, activate this. Then they're going to mill 1, at which point I'm not even going to remove a marker from their unison, because it's remove a marker for every 2 cards in their drop and warp. So they're going to have 1 card in their drop. They could quite easily say, right, I'll remove a marker for every 2 cards in my drop. Oh, I've only got 1 card in my drop, so I don't remove any markers. At which point this card is literally useless. All I've done is mill them for 1, turn 1. They're much better plays. So like I say, I found it quite difficult to kind of use this card effectively. It's only really good on your opponent's second unison a lot of the time. I mean, there are some decks that will rely on, like, say, a 4-cost unison, like the Boo Agent of Destruction unison, for instance. Generally, that doesn't come down to turn 4, at which point you probably have put a fair few cards in their drop area. So in those cases, this can become a pretty difficult choice for them. But a lot of like I say, a lot of decks, they're getting their unison down turn 1 when this card just isn't effective. I have actually found myself just using the activate main / battle on this way more than the counterplay. I mean, even going back to what I was saying before with Quake, or is it? No, it's Tackle, the one that needs your opponent to have the unison out. This card here, some people, because they know you have the counterplay as well, they just won't even bother trying to play their unison, especially if this gets revealed then add to your hand, which I guess is another downside of the fact that you have to look at the top card of the deck and it has to be a Shadow Dragon for it to come to your hand. You have to reveal it to your opponent, so they will have a pretty good understanding of what cards are even in your hand, and so they can quite easily play around this counterplay by not even attempting to play the unison. And I would say, if you are playing against Xeno Dragons, if you can get away with it, if your deck is not entirely built around your unison being in play, just don't play them, because you're going to run into this counterplay, and you're going to run into this activate main and battle. If you can just stop, like, potentially 8 cards in your opponent's deck from having their, like, main effect, that is probably worth it if you can get away with it. So yeah, that's another big downside for the deck. And I guess at this point, we're just going to have to wait and see what the new Shadow Dragons are going to bring to the deck. Are they going to reinforce the parts of the deck that aren't quite there yet? Or are they just going to keep leaning into what the deck already does in a way that isn't particularly helpful? So yeah, I guess those are my kind of general thoughts I've kind of gleaned about this deck from having played with it for a few weeks. The deck feels like incomplete at times. And just not that strong. Like, I don't know that I would put it in top 5, maybe even the top 10 decks in the game at the moment. Just doesn't feel quite there yet. But again, there are more Shadow Dragons to come. Maybe this, you would draw a comparison to the Yellow Shadow Dragons that came out all the way back in set 10. Maybe after just the 1 set's worth of cards, it didn't feel quite there in the same way. And that deck obviously got filled out with a 3 sets worth of Shadow Dragons, as well as some promos in different tournament packs or the premium packs. So maybe this deck could go in a similar way where it just keeps getting supported going forward with even more Shadow Dragons until it gets to a point where it feels like a complete deck. And it also feels like you have a bit of wiggle room, because at the moment, like I say, you want your deck to be 90-95% Shadow Dragons, and there's just not quite enough for it to feel like you can put together a complete deck that is in any way kind of unique. It feels like most people are going to end up running the exact same set of cards. Like, that's something that Bandai have generally done a good job of avoiding, of having, like, archetypes where the deck list is like set in stone and you just cannot deviate from it, which this deck kind of does feel like it in a lot of ways, with just so few black Shadow Dragon cards for you to be able to choose from. Hopefully in this upcoming set we're going to get 3 Shadow Dragon battle cards and 3 Shadow Dragon extra cards at least. Hopefully that will give us a bit more room to kind of make the deck our own from person to person, so it's not everyone running the exact same list, and so it doesn't feel like the deck just kind of builds itself, which it kind of does feel like that at the moment. So yeah, like I say, those are my thoughts. Go ahead and leave a like on this video, it really helps me out. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already to be notified when new videos come out, and thanks for watching.